Hey, Dr. Bill here. I have a very special guest for you who will take you from drinking to writing and everything else in between. So we'll get to that in a second. Why do we even do these podcasts? Well, Leap Week 2025 will be July 13th to the 19th. And this year we're going to be at Pepperdine. This is our first time at Pepperdine. UCLA is turning into an Olympic village where we work. So we won't be at UCLA probably until after the Olympics, but Pepperdine should be amazing. We expect to have 400 students there, and it should be phenomenal. And what is LEAP anyhow?
LEAP is an entrepreneurship program for high school and college students aged 15 to 25 that we have taught at UCLA for the last 16 years. What do we teach? We teach students skills to be successful in life. And the coolest thing about LEAP is that I've asked so many of my celebrity patients and business leaders to come and help, and they do. We've had Mark Wahlberg, Paula Abdul, Michael Strahan, Kathy Bates, Anthony Hopkins, Apollo Ono, Eric Garcetti, Jason Alexander. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And these people come and share the secrets of their success with our LEAP students. Typically, we get about 500 to 550 students every summer, and we literally pack them with so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose. And one of the parts that the students love most is when we bring in these mentors. So we started this Meet the Mentor series because we didn't want this to just be a one and done week. We wanted to do it throughout the year and continue to give these students great information from great mentors to teach them how to do businesses in every field you could ever imagine.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our mentor for today. Autumn Chiklis is a national best-selling author, screenwriter, and entrepreneur based in Los Angeles. Shortly after graduating from USC, her debut novel, Smothered, became an LA Times bestseller, received a starred booklist review from the National Library Association, and was featured in Town & Country magazine, US Magazine, PopStar, and Good Morning America. She is currently developing a half-hour comedy based on her book with the Tannenbaum Company and is in the process of finishing her sophomore novel called Unfiltered. Other writing credits include The Wedding Trap, Sunset Living, and Ever After, which range in genre from romantic comedy to horror. It could all be the same.
It's a thin line, actually.
Outside of the entertainment industry, Autumn is the co-founder of the Pink Pig Tequila. Now, how this relates to writing, I guess when your writing doesn't sell, it gives you an out. A multi-award-winning tequila that's all about celebrating the power and the ambition of women. So, Autumn, thank you so much. You've been my patient forever. Your family comes to me. Your dad is well-known. And in fact, it was really funny. Remember when those videos were really popular, where everybody was just shooting these weird videos of where they worked and what they did. So I had a video team come and go through the whole office, and your dad was getting his teeth cleaned. And so I asked him in advance if I could do it because he's so recognizable. And he's like, yeah, sure. And then every time I showed that video in one of my seminars with like hundreds and thousands of dentists, they'd see him and they'd all like start clapping and stuff. It was hilarious.
That's so terrific. I'm hoping that, it was a really hilarious shot of someone like in his mouth.
Yeah, we went right into his mouth. Yeah, it was great.
Amazing.
So you started in entertainment as a child actor on your dad's series.
Yes.
How did that all happen?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Of course. In terms of how my career started, I suppose it was when I was young. I was very lucky. I had my dad as a father and as a mentor and as a role model. And obviously he's been acting my whole life. And it started as just, playing make-believe in the backyard with him. And we'd put on shows in the backyard and one thing led to another. And eventually I ended up playing his daughter on one of his television series, The Shield, which was an extraordinary 7-year experience. I think I was 8 when it started, and 7, 8, and then 15 when it ended. So
Wow.
it really, was a formative time for me. And during that period, I was so lucky that I got to witness so many extraordinary storytellers. And I was a theater kid. I loved doing all the plays at school. Obviously, I was working in a professional context as well. So acting at that point was my whole life, and I loved it. I still do. I absolutely love performing whenever I get the chance. But it started as just father-daughter putting on shows together, and one thing would lead to another, and then we were working together, and I have all of the hope in the world that we'll continue working together, maybe just in different capacities moving forward.
That's awesome. So when you were in college, you started this texting with your mother.
Yes.
And that kind of became the basis for Smothered, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So
how did that all happen?
So I should preface this by saying I've always been a bit of a secret writer, where whenever I had downtime, whenever it was just me alone with my thoughts, the first thing I wanted to do was write, and not just journal. I wanted to write fiction. My favorite thing was creating characters and telling stories, but I was very secretive about it. I would never, ever dream of letting anyone read my writing. And as it turns out, it's because a lot of the times the thing that you want the most is the thing that scares you the most. So I did not let anyone see a thing that I wrote until college. And I majored in theater. I minored in screenwriting, and I got into screenwriting kind of under the disguise, so to speak, of, okay, I'm going to write my own parts and see if I can. That feels like a natural way to kind of delve into writing a little bit. So I was already studying writing in that capacity, and getting my work out there. And I should talk about my mom a little bit, which is you have the extraordinary joy of knowing my mom.
Yes.
I know you had Dad in that video. Truly, you should have used my mom. There is no one more electric and exciting to be around. But she and I had a very, I guess you could call it backwards relationship and dynamic, because I was nerdy growing up. I did not want to go to I think I went to 2 high school parties. And called Mom to pick me up early. I was reserved, and I read a lot, which is wonderful, and I highly recommend it. But I just wasn't, I wasn't the kind of daughter she was anticipating, because my mom is loud and gregarious and finds an elevated surface everywhere she goes and is dancing on the table. And she was so ready to have like a girl that wanted to go shopping all the time and like ditch school with me, and not recommending that to all the kids watching. But, she had this idea. She was the coolest mom in the world. And she had me, who was the nerdiest, geekiest kid. She didn't know how to handle it. So we had a very backwards dynamic where she would text me these outrageous and hilarious things. And eventually I started posting them on social media just to, first of all, get our dynamic out there and in ways kind of prove.
Like, give me an example of a really funny one.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So for example, I found out I asked my mom if she had been going around telling people I was her stepmother. And if you see us, we look identical. And she was like, oh, of course not. Okay, maybe, but it's just because you're 21 and I do not look old enough to have a 21-year-old. Okay. So things like this, where she was just hilarious and larger than life, and telling me that I should be going out and partying and sneaking out and being with boys. And I would obviously just do the exact opposite.
Okay, now we get like a smothering Jewish mother thing because we grew up with this. But, it's crazy. So last night I went out to dinner with a group of guys, and half were Jewish and half weren't. Mm-hmm. And I was telling this joke. The first Jewish president gets elected, right? Okay. So he says, Mom, you got to come to my inauguration. She's like, oh, no, I got to get a dress. He goes, no, don't worry. I have shoppers. Okay. But then the parking. He goes, no, you'll go in the presidential limo. She goes, but what about Mom, you're going to be on the stage with me. She goes, okay, fine, I'll go. So she goes, and she's sitting there next to a stranger. She bumps the guy. He goes, yeah. She goes, you see the guy there with his hand on the Bible? He goes, yeah. He goes, his brother is a doctor. Now, I told this joke to my friends. The Jewish guys bust up. The Gentiles are like, well, what's so funny about that?
Oh,
I'm like, no, you don't understand. If you have Jewish parents, their dream is for you to be a doctor. So I'm just wondering if, like, are people who aren't Jewish going to get this stuff?
Absolutely. Okay. So I should say that, first of all, my mom is very Jewish. But
I know.
As you know. But at the end of the day, I think that something that we all have in common, it doesn't matter what religion you are, what ethnicity you are, what culture you come from, everyone will say they have the craziest moms. And they are overbearing. They want what's best for us. And sometimes what they demand is best for us isn't what we want necessarily. And so in ways, this is a very universal tale as old as time story. It's just through a very specific lens. And I think, like all comedy and all storytelling, if it's specific enough, people will relate to it because they will see, if it's not necessarily, oh, my mom wanted me to become a doctor, everyone has that equivalent of the doctor. And of course, my mom, we have a bit of a flipped dynamic where most Jewish mothers and mothers in general, we see being like, oh my God, I'm so worried about you. And trust me, my mom is worried. It's raining out. She called me like 5 times to make sure I was driving slow enough. But she also was where a lot of Jewish mothers would say, I want you to be a doctor. My mom was like, oh my God, you could easily be a model. We'll just get you some Botox and you're going to be there.
Oh, I know. I don't know who writes their material, but it's really good. For instance, my parents had their 60th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Right? So I called them up and I said, Mom, Dad, congratulations. It's kind of a little bittersweet, though, because I'll never be able to say I was married to somebody for 60 years. Darling, it's not your fault. Of course not. I mean, but like, they don't even realize how funny they are.
They don't. I swear. I think my mom has caught on after the book. I think she leans into it more. But really, truly, this is just who she is.
Well, I grew up with 4 boys and a girl. So my brothers and I are all a year apart. We still don't understand how my mother got pregnant because she understands nothing. I mean, when you have 4 boys, there are some things that are so obvious that my mother, clueless. Clueless.
So the original title of the book, when I first conceived of it, was Raising Mom. And it's because I always felt like the mother in the dynamic in ways. And I think that I saw this on the internet somewhere and it resonated so deeply. There is something wild about traveling with a parent individually. When I travel with my mom, I'm like, how did you raise me? She doesn't know where her boarding pass is. I'm like, how did you? And by the way, deeply intelligent woman, but for some reason when we're traveling, I'm like leading her around by the backpack. So it is funny how at a certain point, the dynamic flips and you feel like you know more, and I certainly don't, but there's that feeling of I have to, take care of you in ways and tell you what's what in ways. And that push and pull, I think, is super universal.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So this goes from text messages to mom to a best-selling book and now potentially a series.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about that.
So the, original journey is when I first conceived of the book, I was posting these text messages online. I didn't think, I'm going to write a fiction novel. I always wanted to write a novel, but I figured I'll be 60 and have something to say and I'll be smart enough to do it. And I just had a very specific idea of what authors look like. And even though I wanted it deeply, again, I had a bit of imposter syndrome and I had the extraordinary luck and privilege of meeting my now literary agent, Erin Malone. And the short version of this is I originally conceived it as a coffee table book that would have anecdotes and then text messages and be more of a nonfiction situation. And I sent it to her. I wasn't represented by her at the time, but I wanted feedback. I wanted to know what she thought of it. And she said, I love this concept. I think it's so relevant, but I think this would benefit from expanding it. Would you consider writing this as a fiction novel? And I said, of course, absolutely, even though I had no idea what I was doing. And I was probably crazy to say yes, but sometimes opportunity comes knocking and you can either open the door or you can run away from it. And like I said, I was so lucky that she took a chance on me and she changed my life. And she was the one who encouraged me to give this a shot. So I went home and immediately started writing. the rest, it got published. Whirlwind, it became a bestseller. Still to this day, can't believe it. And then I ended up meeting my original producers on it, and then we originally sold it, and then it went into turnaround. This was back when the book originally came out. And perhaps everything happens for a reason, because I ended up tabling this concept for a while because other projects came up. I was, continuing to write and continued my career, but I always just loved this. It's my baby in ways. And I just feel like that mother-daughter dynamic is so tender and fraught and wonderful. And I mean, my mom's my best friend, and most of the women in my life feel the same way. So I'm like, I feel like this needs to come back. And thankfully, we met our now producers on it, which you mentioned, the Tannenbaums, who are geniuses and extraordinary. And the reason we kind of brought this back is after the pandemic, there was this article that came out in several about how there were more people living at home with their parents than I think it was since the Great Depression was the last time, where so many people of all ages were forced, given the circumstances, to move back in with their family. And that, because forget mothers and daughters, that becomes, it's like Thanksgiving every day, right? We revert to what 16-year-olds, and the mothering and the fathering becomes a certain way. And just when everyone's in the house together, it brings out this primal dynamic in all of us that we think we've matured and grown, and we just go right back to square one.
I don't know if it was that they were forced to. I think it out of necessity, it was really comforting. I mean, for instance, my twins lived in apartments with like 5 and 6 other girls, right? Mm-hmm. They all got COVID all at the same time. They went to, but like, they didn't care that there was a pandemic. So I never saw my kids because I didn't want to get COVID.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And, so I was like alone in my condo all the time. They had the time of their life, and I know a lot of other people that moved in with their parents just so you weren't alone the whole time. I'm divorced. I wasn't going to move in with my ex-wife, and my parents, they live out in Westlake. I wasn't going to live. So I was like alone in my condo, like in isolation for weeks, and it drove me nuts. I hate being alone like that.
Listen, it was a really fraught time, and you're so right that a lot of people, I mean, I potted with my parents very quickly, and I ended up not seeing a lot of my friends for a long time because I didn't want to get my parents sick, and obviously I didn't want to get sick either, but my main concern were my parents. And I know so many people who, for various reasons, moved back in because I potted with my parents. I don't see anyone anyway. I'm going to save the money on rent. And they moved back in. There are people who have families and children, and during the, not just isolation, but that initial quarantine where, kids weren't going to school. Mom, I need help. I need help raising my kid right now, or financial struggles, which is obviously so prevalent right now. The economy, there's just so many reasons that people have been either forced or choose to move back in with their families. And it's not a new concept. I think for most of history, people lived at least close by their families, but in the modern world, certainly in my demographic, people move across the country. They don't spend time with, they don't live with their parents in the same way. So there's just so much comedy to mine in that. And there's so much, I think I use the word tenderness and beauty in those relationships. And of course, like I said, they're fraught. No matter how much you love someone, our families drive us nuts. So inevitably there's conflict. So we basically said, we think now actually more than ever is the right time to bring this to the TV screen.
No, I agree. And you know what? Let's talk about the evolution of your career as a writer.
Sure.
It sounds like you and I actually had very similar paths. So,
really?
Well, I mean, I was on this hit TV show, Extreme Makeover, and I was approached by Jan Miller, who is a publisher agent who works with self-help books in the celebrity world. So she was with Bill Phillips, and so she only worked with people who were like on TV and did self-help. And there had never been a book on on dentistry, on cosmetic dentistry.
Interesting.
So I wrote a book called $1 Billion Smile. And when they first approached me and they said, do you want to write a book? I said, no, I want to write a bestseller. They're like,
wow.
Oh, well, I said, a book is a dime a dozen, but if I write a bestseller, I could go on Jay Leno, I could go on Oprah, I could go on all these talk shows.
Good for you.
And they're like, well, how are you going to make sure it's a bestseller? I said, well, we'll see. So just like you did with your tequila, which we'll talk to in a second, I Googled it. Like, how do you become a New York Times bestseller? And I found a company called Promote a Book. And I met with the guy who ran the company. He said, well, look, at that time, and it isn't the same today, but at that time, you needed to sell 20,000 copies in the first 2 weeks. And I said, okay, I have a dental company with 100,000 dentists who buy products from me. And we rank them A, B, C, D, and F.
Mm-hmm.
Our A and B dentists were 20,000 dentists. I knew that. I
Wow.
said, what if I bought them the book as a gift of gratitude for supporting my company? Would that count? He goes, hey, as long as you pay full price.
A sale is a sale, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, you can't do that today,
Sure,
but
yeah.
you could then. So I bought 20,000 books. I sent it to my 20,000 top customers, thanking them for their support, and said, hey, if you want to have more copies, you can get it at half price, and all of that money will go to the Leap Foundation.
Oh.
So I ended up raising $300,000
Wow.
by buying 20,000 books. And in 2 weeks, I was a New York Times bestseller, and I got on Jay Leno, like all these shows, and it was awesome.
Well, that's unbelievable. And I think the thing that strikes me the most is you talked about Google, and yes, that is how I initially.
Yeah,
my
we'll
partner
do
and I-
that with tequila, but
But how
let's talk about
resourceful.
your road as a writer.
Yes. But how resourceful of you to and have the presence of mind of going, hey, I can. It's just very thinking very big and being able to look at the system as it is and figure out the best opportunities for you and the best way that you can make a difference and an impact. I think that's amazing.
So how did your whole thing evolve with your book?
So basically, I mentioned how I met Erin. She encouraged me to write this book. So it started as a pitch. I wrote the first few chapters and a very detailed outline, which I very quickly threw away after selling it. Outlines are great. I struggle with them. I have an idea where a story's going to go, and then in the writing, it very much changes often. But they are very valuable. So I sold it, and then I had a deadline. And so suddenly I could not weasel out of this. And I'm so grateful for that, because ultimately, like I said, I've always wanted to do this, and it gave me the opportunity and the confidence to really throw myself at it and say, okay, obviously I've hit a nerve here. Obviously, this is a topic that people are interested in. When I was posting the messages online, by the way, what got my attention was the fact that people were really responding positively to them. They were liking it and sharing it and sending it to their own moms and all of these things. So it gave me a sense that I was striking a chord. And so I wrote the book. It came out.
Now, did you write it all by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
But you also, it was nonfiction, right?
Well, right. But this was very funny. I got an offer to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very dear friend named Paul Lombardi, who's a reporter for New York One News, who also writes. And so Paul is my co-author. So he moved from New York, and he lived with me and my daughters for 6 weeks.
Aww.
And every night after work, he would interview me for an hour or two. And he basically came up with the chapters and he put the whole book together.
Terrific.
And it was phenomenal. And when it was all done, I sat down and I read it. I'm like, oh no. Paul's voice and my voice are not similar.
Sure.
At all. Paul's voice was very over the top, kind of flamboyant.
Sure.
And he would talk about George Clooney's fabulous smile. I'm like, Okay, Paul, no fabulous in the whole book.
That's not how you
nothing
would
is
say it.
fabulous, you know?
Yeah. By the way,
So-
I have collaborated as a writer. I have 2 scripts right now, where one with my dad, which was beautiful and wonderful, and then another with a dear friend of mine. And there is an art to blending voices.
Right,
And,
right.
Especially, obviously, when it comes to nonfiction, there are specific. It's coming from your voice, so he has the challenge, I suppose, of creating something that sounds like you.
Exactly.
And I'm sure it got there, but then you have someone like me writing this entire front to back. You know, I had an editor on it eventually who was terrific, who helped me.
Yeah, I had one too. She was really helpful.
Yeah, who helped shape.
Yeah.
But in terms of story and the actual, words and jokes and character development, that was all me. And it requires different. There are different skills you have to pull out as a writer. And voicing is such an interesting thing because every screenwriter, every person who writes a book has their own distinct voice. And then when you're writing fiction, one of the challenges is the characters also have to have their distinct voice, and it all will kind of go under the umbrella of your sense of humor, your sensibility.
At USC, you studied journalism, right?
No, I studied theater and cinematic arts.
Okay.
So,
And so the writing was basically kind of a byproduct of conversations with your mother. Now, did your literary agent approach you, or you approached her, or
I
how did that
approached her. So the way this happened was, you mentioned earlier, I was an actor. So my manager at the time said, hey, I had basically sent her the book pitch, and I said, I like the idea of this eventually, actually, for a television series. IP is really big right now. Obviously, everyone wants some original material, which is why I said, okay, let me make a coffee table book with some anecdotes, something that we can get on shelves, and then we'll be able to point to it and say, all right, here's the proof of concept. Let's sell this as a series. So that was kind of my initial vision for it. It again, didn't occur to me to write a novel, not because it's not something that I've always deeply wanted. I just, imposter syndrome to the max. I was like 21 years old, still in college, would not have crossed my mind to have the chutzpah to be like, yeah, I'm going to write a novel. But I sent it to my manager, who then said, like, hey, you're represented at WME for acting. Let's go into their book department and see if there's someone there who would like to read this. And that was how we found Erin, who, again, she knows, I love you so much, Erin. You changed my life. She is the first person who really saw something in the way that I wrote in that way, and who encouraged me to go down this specific path. Like I said, I never would have imagined doing this. And now, I mean, I'm almost done with my second book. I love it. I love doing this so much. But yeah, I went to her.
What kind of advice would you give to a student who's interested in, emulating something like this?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to start with the most basic in the world, which is you can do it. And what I mean by that is we're all plagued by imposter syndrome. There, especially when it comes to authorship, writing, there is this feeling of untouchability sometimes when it comes to fiction, or at least certainly when I was growing up, it felt that way. Perhaps it's more accessible now with Book Talk, but I don't think so. I think that with any career, when you're looking at the pinnacle of, whatever your dream is, so to speak, it feels like there's no way that I could approach that, at least when you're starting out. Maybe if I was older and had collected a little bit more experience, I would have felt differently. But the first thing I want to say is don't listen to the imposter syndrome. If this is something that interests you, start. There is so much value to starting. The second thing I want to say is that perfection is the enemy of good. I am a deep perfectionist, especially in my writing. It will not serve you. It is so much better to get the words on the page. You will edit them. I'm a self-editor. I edit as I go, and I'll write a chapter, and then I go back and forth and back and forth. Everyone has their process. That's the way I do it, sometimes to a fault. But oftentimes I have to remind myself this is good enough. I will come back and I will revise. If your ability and your taste, if there's a gap, which there often is when you first start, and there certainly is, at least for me at this point, I have very high ambitions of where I'd like my writing to go, and I don't feel like I'm there yet. Just keep working and keep doing it. The practice of it, reading, writing, doing it every day, it's just so good for those muscles. And you really do improve over time. And then the third thing I would say is there is a value in starting and there is a value in finishing. And that's when anyone who has an idea at the beginning, and we all do, right? You get that initial jump of that initial motivation where you're so excited about it. And I have the best story in the world that I need to tell. And I'm going to write, and I'm going to buy a typewriter, and I'm going to be that kind of writer. And you have all these ideas of what that means. And you start and you love it and it's amazing. And no one has ever done anything like what you're doing before. And all of those emotions. And not long after you reach your first hurdle of, oh my God, actually, I have no idea what I'm doing. I hate this. I have a better idea and it's something else. I'm going to abandon this altogether. And a lot of the battle is in the completion, where when you reach that point in the process that is inevitable of it's not good enough, I don't know if I should keep going, doggedly pursuing it every single day until it is done and finishing it, it's a really, really valuable skill set, because so many people start projects, but not nearly enough people finish them.
And I'm going to add a number 4.
Yes.
So the cool thing about your career and my career that mirror each other is I wrote a book and I have like a side gig, dentistry, you know? One of the most frustrating things is after you complete these projects and you do your 1, 2, and 3 is this waiting game. Mm-hmm. And so you came up with a great outlet, your tequila.
Absolutely.
And I love the fact that you just basically Googled, how do I sell a tequila brand? Oh my goodness. Yeah. So tell us how this all happened, because this is a great pastime while you're waiting for all the other things to come to fruition. Oh, right? 100%. And also it's such a passion project. So the story of the tequila is a number of years ago. One of my best friends, her name is Marissa. The two of us grew up in Los Angeles together. We went to middle school and high school together. We're approaching March, which is Women's History Month, and we were at an event for International Women's Day. And we ordered skinny margaritas at the bar, and it basically launched this conversation about women in the spirits industry and how, all of our friends are huge tequila consumers, enjoyers, lovers, and yet it is still a very male-dominated industry. And there's also this kind of mentality that when women drink tequila spirits, it needs to be skinny or diet or less caloric, or, it's less alcoholic, or you have to chase it with fruit juice because I actually can't stand the taste of booze. There's kind of these diminishing ideas that women can't enjoy spirits in the same way that men do. And not to diminish a fruity cocktail, I do love a fruity cocktail, but I also enjoy, I have this on the rocks. So started as this conversation at the bar, and one thing led to another. And we said, okay, if we were going to create a brand, what would that look like? And if we were to create a company, what would that look like? And it started just as this fun conversation. And then the next day, Marissa calls me and said, hey, listen, I was thinking about our tequila discussion last night, and I actually think it's a good idea. We should pursue it. And one thing led to another. And I know this is where you brought up Google, because she has a full-time job. I have a full-time job. How are we going to start a company? How are we going to start a tequila business? We love the product. We love the idea of creating something that's about empowering women. In this space, what do we do? And Google is such an excellent resource. We simply sat down and went, all right, distilleries in tequila in Jalisco. What does that look like? What are some of the steps that you can take? And now even from when we started a few years ago, it's just gone exponentially better. I
I don't know all the capabilities of ChatGPT yet, but I'm sure with AI, there's
even better.
Yeah, it's going to get even more specific, where we would Google like, how to start a company. Now you can create more personalized, directives, and it's just so amazing what people have access to now. But yeah, it really truly started as Googling and then asking around with other people who have started companies who are in the legal space.
Where is this sold throughout the country, or?
So we ship to, I believe, 39 states, but it's primarily California based.
And why isn't it pink? Because that would be such an easy thing to do with tequila.
Sure. So actually, the type of tequila, it's called an añejo cristalino, which is an añejo. So it's an aged tequila. Ours is aged for a year in white oak bourbon barrels, which is the aging process in those barrels helps create a very smooth finish. So oftentimes you'll take a shot of alcohol, you'll take a shot of tequila, and there will be a burn where the burn is very minimal because of that aging process. And it also helps with the complexity of flavor and different tasting notes. And on the nose, it just makes it really, really a wonderful experience from a culinary perspective. But then, unlike other añejos, this is filtered. So this is the newest segment of tequila, where it's filtered to get rid of the color. So normally when you see añejos, they have that caramelly color. And that makes it crystal clear, hence the name. And that makes it more versatile. So where normally you would never put an añejo in a mixed drink, like I said, I prefer to drink this either neat or on the rocks, but it also, because of the nature of the flavor profile, lends itself to some really cool cocktails where there's a lot of vanilla and butterscotch on the nose. And so people will create really great espresso martinis with it, or I have seen people create, basil herb cocktails and passion fruit, just so many really interesting things. So it makes it more versatile. And also it's just slightly less sweet than your typical añejo, where it can be a little almost desserty, which some people love, and that's great. But we wanted something that was just a touch less sweet.
Awesome.
So yeah, that is why the actual bottle is clear. I should tell you about the name too, by the way, because you asked about why it's not pink. I should clarify why we call it the Pink Pig. I mentioned my co-founder and my friend Marissa. She told me a story years ago that I absolutely fell in love with, about how when she was in preschool growing up here, after recess, it was reading time, and there were all these different animal pillows you can sit on. And all she wanted was the one pink pig pillow. And every day she was very shy and reserved. Someone else would get to it first. And this became like her crusade. And every day her mom would pick her up, go, "Did you get the pink pig today?" And she would say no. And eventually her mom said, "All right, learning opportunity," sat her down and went, "This is something you want. You need to set yourself up for success. You need to," apropos what we were talking about earlier, doggedly pursue it. So you are going to check your watch and see when recess is ending. So you are first in line after recess, and then you can take a look through the window and see where it is so you can make a beeline. If there's something you want, you have to put yourself in a position to go after it. And of course, it's a silly preschool story, but it became this larger metaphor for everything else in her life. And
it's awesome.
Yeah, and eventually an inside joke between the two of us. So whenever we would go out and cheers to something, we would say, "Let's get that pig," in honor of her story.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
We decided it's got to be authentic to us. Let's call it the Pink Pig.
So when do you realistically think we'll be able to see your new series?
I hope that you guys will get to see it as soon as possible. That being said, there are still a few steps that we need to take before we can actually get it out there. But we're deep in the development process, which is exciting.
Awesome. And if students want to contact you or follow you, what's the best way?
Absolutely. So social media is definitely the best way. I have an Instagram. I'm the owner of it. I direct message everyone. So at Autumn Chiklis. I think that'd probably be the best way.
All right. Awesome. Hey, thank you. And that was amazing. And Dr. Bill, over and out.